Today we're looking at the least diverse big cities in the United States. American cities are like big, bustling, all-you-can-eat buffets of diversity. And guess what? They've been piling more onto their plates in recent years. The U.S. Census shows that nearly 70% of our biggest cities have turned into even more of a melting pot since 2012. Now, don't get too excited or don't get too worked up. The change isn't really like going from black and white TV to 4K overnight. We're talking a modest 3% boost on average in diversity from 2012 to 2022. But here's where it gets interesting. Some cities really spice things up, like Detroit, for instance. It was kind of like this plain oatmeal of diversity, but over the last decade, they really spiced it up with some honey and some brown sugar and maybe some raisins. And their largest demographic went from 83% of the population to 75%. The people from the Pew Research Center, who probably spend a lot of time looking at graphs and charts and have easels, say demographic change is slow but constant, like a glacier. Despite the changes over the last 10 years, some cities' largest demographic stayed top dog by a serious amount. And that's what we're looking at today, the least diverse big cities in the United States, where one demographic has a much higher percentage of the population than everyone else. Now, one thing before we get rolling, I want to explain, some of these stats won't add up to 100%. That's because there's certain races that overlap that people claim they're both. And in the census, it usually ends up that most cities will be about 110% of everything. You know, it's kind of weird. I didn't want to bog down the video with a whole bunch of numbers. So it is what it is. Just know that some of these will be over 100% when you add up the percentages. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Tennessee is a city known for its rich cultural diversity, reflecting a tapestry of traditions and heritages. This diversity is deeply rooted in its history as a pivotal center for blues music, soul, rock and roll, which brought together African American, white, and other cultural influences. Read up on the music history of Memphis. It is very interesting. The city's demographics showcase a significant African American population along with a growing Latino, Asian, and other ethnic communities. Memphis's diversity is not just ethnic, it's also cultural. There is a blend of rural and urban traditions, southern hospitality, and a pretty serious art scene. Memphis has a population of about 650,000 residents. The entire metro area has about 1.3, but we're only focusing on the cities. And of that 650,000, about 67.7% are black, 29% is white, and then Hispanic 6.9% and on down. Go to any restaurant in Memphis that's not some sort of franchise operation, and you'll see the diversity there. Number 9, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. An estimated 4,000 to 5,000 families settled in western Pennsylvania between 1768 and 1770. Of these settlers, about a third were English Americans, another third was Scotch-Irish, and the rest were Welsh, German, and a few other things like Polish. They didn't branch out much past that. Pittsburgh was once a melting pot for European immigrants drawn to its booming steel industry. The city has evolved, but not very much in the diversity department. You'll probably start to see change in Pittsburgh in the next few decades. They've turned into quite the little tech hub. And when you got tech, you draw people in from all around the world. Now, I'm not saying Pittsburgh is void of any kind of ethnic restaurants or anything like that. They have them, but when you compare it to other cities their size, they're not nearly as plentiful. 67.8% of Pittsburgh is white, 23.1% is black, Asian is 5.6%, Hispanic 3.4%, and everyone else is under 1%. Number 8, Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville, Kentucky has a pretty interesting history, dating back to its early days of the late 1700s. It was founded by George Rogers Clark, who was a big name in the American Revolutionary War. He and a bunch of his settler buddies floated on down the Ohio River and landed at where Louisville, Kentucky is today. A lot of those settlers were Scotch-Irish, Welsh, and some Germans. Like most of the cities on this list, their demographics back then aren't too far from what their demographics are today. Where Louisville is right now was back in the day a great spot for trading and travel. It was also a great spot for flooding, so they had to deal with that. These are some pretty tough people back in the day. Louisville has about 633,000 residents, with about 70% being white or Caucasian. 24.5% are black or African American. Hispanic and Asians show up on there too, but everyone else is underneath 1%. Number 7, Lexington, Kentucky. Lexington has a pretty cool history. Way back in the 1770s, a bunch of adventurous folks from Virginia decided to explore the unknown lands of what is now Kentucky. These early settlers were a pretty brave bunch because, let's face it, setting up camp in the wilderness back in the day was not a walk in the park. They named the area after the Battle of Lexington in Massachusetts. It was a big deal during the American Revolution. Imagine trying to put your town together, you don't know what to name it, and then you find out all this fighting for your freedom is going on, basically a world away for them, but in their own country, or what would become their country. So name it Lexington. The early settlers of Lexington were English, Scot-Irish, Welsh, German, French, Dutch, and even Swedish. And if you look at the demographics of the place now, they kind of thought, you know what, if it's working, why don't we keep it this way? Now, their diversity has gotten a little bit more interesting over the decades and centuries, but they haven't strayed far from their beginnings. Lexington has a population of about 320,000 residents, and it has never had a down decade. I mean, they've always gained population throughout its history. I've been to Lexington a few times, and for a good-sized city, it's very quiet, and it's very much a small-town vibe to this place. I mean, the entire metro area of Lexington only has about 517,000 residents. But of the city's residents, 76.6% are white or Caucasian, 15.2% are black or African American, Hispanics are 7.4%, Asians are 4.0%, and everyone else is below 1%. Number 6, Portland, Oregon. Yeah, this one's kind of a no-brainer. Even though Portland's liberal and all that other stuff, there's not many ethnic people that live here. Portland, Oregon started off as a trading post and a ferry for pretty much white settlers coming to Oregon. The state tried to have their constitution say that it had to be white. Yeah, that was a thing. Sure, we're talking the, late 1800s they did that, but kind of tells you where their head was back in the day. Right now they say Portland's population is about 652,000 residents, with about 2.5 living in the metro area. I'm skeptical of those numbers. I mean, half the city lives in tents. And if you're going door to door trying to count population, you gotta knock on some doors. Have you ever tried to knock on a tent flap? It's impossible. The Oregon Trail ended not too far from Portland. And if you know anything about the Oregon Trail, past what you learned on the game, it was nothing but Europeans. Of the 652,000 people that live in Portland, Oregon, 78.1% are white or Caucasian, 9.3% are Hispanic, Asians are 9.0%, and African Americans or black, 6.3%. Everyone else is under 1%. Number 5, Omaha, Nebraska. If you didn't know Omaha, Nebraska was lacking in diversity, you've never been to Omaha, Nebraska. Get off the plane there. You'll see. The land that would become Omaha, Nebraska actually became part of the U.S. when Thomas Jefferson nailed the Louisiana Purchase deal in 1803. Back then, the central U.S. was pretty much a huge, mysterious open space, and nobody really knew what to expect from it. Now, when the Mormons were heading west, they set up the first non-native camp around the place that would become known as Cutler's Park. This was sort of a pit stop for folks moving west around 1846 to the spring of 1848. This wasn't an easy place to live. People faced a lot of hardships through the rough weather. Some of them would get there and they'd stay there for the winter. Problem was, food was hard to come by. Sickness ran through the camp. Sadly, a lot of them didn't make it through the tough conditions. Omaha really doesn't have a whole lot of diversity going on. They have 487,000 residents in the city of Omaha, and of that, about 79.1% are white or Caucasian. Hispanic is 14.7%, black is 12.5%, Asian is 3.8%, and everyone else is below 1%. Number 4, Detroit, Michigan. Detroit, Michigan has a really strange past when it comes to diversity and different races living there. Prior to World War II, this was a very white Caucasian city. back in World War II and before, they had a whole lot of manufacturing. I'm sure all of you know this before. It's part of the Rust Belt. Well, things started ramping up during World War II and then the decade or so after. They had a lot of jobs in this part of the country, in Detroit especially. Down in the South, they didn't have a lot of jobs. A lot of the African-American population from the southern states moved up to Detroit and different cities in that area, Cleveland also. And of course, sometime around the late 70s, early 80s, those manufacturing jobs started disappearing. A lot of the Caucasian or white people moved out of the city looking for jobs, moving to new cities, moving to new towns, entire new states. A lot of the black families stayed behind. Now, normally when someone says a place doesn't have much diversity, the first thing that comes into your head is it's got a whole bunch of white people, not enough Hispanic or black people. Detroit's the exact opposite. Currently, Detroit has a population of about 632,000 residents. Of that, 80.1% is black or African American, 15.9% is white or Caucasian, Hispanic is 7.8%, Asian is 1.6%, everyone else is below 1%. Number 3, Colorado Springs. I've been to Colorado Springs many times, lived up there for a while, and I can tell you, Colorado Springs has the demographics of a 1950s country club in Connecticut. There's not a lot of diversity going on in this city. This is a city that's growing, but their diversity is actually not growing. The white and Hispanic population is growing while the black and Asian community is shrinking. Colorado Springs has about 478,000 residents, with the entire metro area having about 755,000. One thing I should mention, a lot of people will lump in the whole Front Range, which is Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs, Pueblo. They consider that the Front Range, and sometimes people will also consider that like one metro area. If you're looking at that, there's about 5 million people living there. But the city has about 478,000 residents. Of that, 80.9% are white or Caucasian. Hispanic is 18.4%, black 7.2%, Asian 3.7%, and everyone else is under 1%. Number 2, El Paso, Texas. El Paso's demographics really hasn't changed much over the last 150 years. Back in 1680, El Paso was a tiny village that suddenly became super important. It turned into the main spot for the Spanish to run the New Mexico territory, all because of the Pueblo Revolt. This was only until 1692, though, when Santa Fe was conquered again and became the capital. Fast forward to 1836, during the Texas Revolution, El Paso was quiet and didn't feel the heat, much of the war that was going on, or battle, whatever you want to call it. Back then, Americans were kind of scarce. Only about 10% of the population in El Paso was considered an American. For a while there, the Mexican people weren't too keen on being part of the United States, or what would become the United States. Then they had to take the piece of paper and show them the deal that Mexico made. Finally, in 1846, they finally accepted it. Now, here's the weird thing about El Paso and any Texas city and the demographics. They have overlapping demographics because a lot of Hispanic people who were born and raised in the United States consider themselves white Hispanics. There isn't much of this in other parts of the United States, but in Texas and in Arizona, it's a big thing. So the last two on this list are going to seem a little strange. El Paso has a population of 678,000 residents, and their demographics go like this. 82% of the population is Hispanic. Just white, no Hispanic, is only 9.2%. Black, 3.7%, Asian, 1.7%. Everyone else is under 1%. But if you look at the stats, like I was saying, the white and Hispanic, it would be 91.2% are white. That's combining the white people and the Hispanic or Latinos that consider themselves white. My wife's like that. She's Hispanic, but she's white. All right, before we get to number 1, if you're thinking about moving to any city, any state in the United States, there is a link for a website called Home and Money in the description area below. If you click on that, they can help you get in contact with a real estate agent anywhere in the country. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi, Texas is a very interesting place. It's a nice place to visit, to tell you the truth. I really like it there. Corpus Christi has a very interesting past. Back in 1839, Colonel Henry Lawrence Kinney and William P. Aubrey kicked things off in Corpus Christi by setting up the Kinney Trading Post, or the Kinney Ranch. It was a cozy little spot where they sold supplies to a Mexican Revolutionary Army not too far away. These were Americans selling to the revolutionaries. Any way you can make a buck, I guess. Then Then in July of 1945, they had to quit selling because future 12th president, General Zachary Taylor, showed up with his army buddies, and they had to quit selling to revolutionaries. They set up camp at Kinney Camp, or Kinney Trading Post. It had like 5 different names. Zachary Taylor and the boys hung around until March of 1846. About a year after that, the place got a name, Corpus Christi, and officially became its own thing on March 9th, 1852. Now, as far as the demographics go, like I said, this is another one where you have the white Hispanics, the white, and then the Hispanics, and then they're all combined. So we get 2 stats for this one. Here we go. The white population of Corpus Christi is 91.6%. The black population is 4.2%. Asians are 2.4%. Now, that white is the combination of Hispanic and white. If you were to separate them, 64% of the population would be Hispanic and about 30% would just be white. So depending on how you look at it, this could have been number 10 or it could have been number 1. All this goes on in a city of 317,000 people. All right, which one surprised you? Let me know in the comment section below. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.